Hayden Panettiere and Wladimir Klitschko had one of those relationships that seemed almost impossible on paper. They came from completely different worlds, lived on different continents, spoke different languages, and spent years trying to figure out how to build a life together. They fell in love, broke up, found their way back to each other, became engaged, and eventually had their daughter Kaya. But when I started going through their synastry, I realized there was so much more to this relationship than what we saw publicly. Before I even get into the synastry, there's something in Hayden's natal chart that I have to show you. Her actor asteroid conjuncts her sun at 0 degrees in the ninth house. And I mean, it really doesn't get much more literal than that. The sun is her identity, who she is. And sitting right on top of it is actor at 0 degrees. She started acting when she was a child, and acting became one of the defining threads running through her entire life. So the chart wrote actor directly on her identity before she ever stepped in front of a camera. And this is exactly why I use asteroids. Sometimes they don't whisper. Sometimes they walk right into the chart and introduce themselves loudly. Now let's get into her synastry with Wladimir, because his Valentine conjuncts her north node at 0 degrees. Valentine is sacrificial love and devotion, and the gestures that make her feel loved and chosen. So when his Valentine is directly on her north node, this becomes the relationship story for her. And at 0 degrees, this is extremely tight and relevant. And we actually see Valentine play out almost literally in their relationship, because after they first met, he flew from Germany to Los Angeles, showed up at her door, and surprised her with this enormous bouquet of flowers. This is Valentine on the North Node, playing out literally with love, devotion, and incredibly thoughtful romantic gestures. Her amour, Penelope, and bride asteroids conjunct his South Node at 0 degrees. And this is another beautiful relationship signature. Amour is love and devotion. Bride brings in the symbolism of becoming a bride. And Penelope is associated with loyalty and waiting and remaining devoted to someone even through long periods of separation. They spent years living on different continents, separating and finding their way back to each other, while trying to figure out how they could actually build a life together. And because all of this is on his South Node, there's this feeling that she was already familiar to him, that the love, devotion, even the idea of marrying her somehow felt familiar. The South Node has that past life energy to it, where the connection can feel old but natural from the beginning. Now, her Pluto and Mistral asteroid conjuncts his North Node. This brings intensity, transformation, and also power plays that can completely alter the course of his life. And here, her Pluto is directly on his North Node. Now, Mistral adds another layer. Mistral is a powerful wind that sweeps through the southern France with a force of nature that comes rushing through and changes the atmosphere around it. So with her Pluto and Mistral and his North Node, she came into his life like that wind, powerful enough to uproot what was there before and leave an entirely different landscape in his future. And because this is on his North Node, that transformation becomes a defining theme in the destiny of the relationship for him. Now, his bride and child conjuncts her Mercury in Virgo, with child at 0 degrees. And this is literal because Mercury is communication, and two of the biggest conversations in their relationship revolved around marriage and having a child. Bride brings in becoming a bride. And child brings in the child that they would eventually have together. And with her Mercury in Virgo, the sign that Mercury rules, this part of the chart speaks the strongest. They became engaged, they planned a wedding, and they had a daughter. But her Mercury is also conjunct Nessus, which carries themes of toxicity, abuse, or destructive patterns. And because this is her Mercury, that darker energy can come through her communication as well. Words that can wound, or arguments that can turn toxic, and conversations that leave damage behind. And that marriage symbolism is reinforced again because her Juno opposes his Mercury at 1 degree. Hayden's Uranus conjuncts his union and Narcissus. Uranus brings instability into a relationship. There can be this on-again, off-again energy. And Narcissus adds another layer because it can bring self-interest into the union, where his needs start competing with her needs within the dynamics of the relationship. They were trying to build a life together, but neither one could step out of their own world long enough to create a new permanent one. So union is trying to bind them together, while Uranus keeps shaking the knot loose, and Narcissus keeps asking what each of them would have to give up to stay tied together. Now his Jupiter and Vesta conjuncts her moon in Taurus. Jupiter expands whatever it touches, and here it's expanding her emotions and her need to feel safe and secure. And Vesta brings devotion into this. It gives her that feeling of being chosen, of having someone devoted to her and wanting to protect what they created together. He made her feel emotionally held and chosen. And with her Taurus moon, his Jupiter and Vesta gave her the kind of emotional ground where she could imagine planting roots and building a life with him. But his personal named asteroid, Wladimir, conjuncts her Chiron. Chiron carries the wound, and there was a tremendous amount of pain woven into his relationship with her. So symbolically, Vladimir's name is written directly across one of the wounded places in her chart. And I think that's incredibly powerful because the relationship ended, but the pain became part of their story. Now, his Ceres and Atropos conjuncts her descendant at 0 degrees. And this is one of the most haunting aspects in their synastry because the descendant represents the partner. It's the cusp of the house that rules committed relationships. Ceres is deeply connected to motherhood. It's the bond between a mother and child, and the grief that comes through separation from that child. In mythology, Ceres is devastated when her daughter is taken away from her. And holding hands with Ceres is Atropos, the fate who cuts the thread. We know where their story eventually went. They had Kaya together, the relationship ended, and Wladimir eventually asked Hayden for full custody. She ultimately signed the papers, and Kaya went to live with him. So directly on her relationship axis is Ceres, who grieves the separation from her child, while Atropos holds the scissors that severs the thread. Now his Mars and Councilman conjunct her Jupiter, and that same Mars conjuncts her Grieve. And what makes this especially compelling is that his Mars is in Cancer, the sign connected to home, family, motherhood, and children. Councilman brings in lawyers and legal matters, while Mars brings conflict and a battle over those Cancer themes. Mars in Cancer is ruthless when it comes to protecting family. And his Mars is also on her Grieve asteroid, bringing grief directly into the relationship. And we know how painfully literal this eventually became. because the family they created together became the center of a legal conflict when he asked for full custody. And Hayden ultimately signed the papers. Her moon squares his Saturn at 2 degrees. This is where her emotional frustration comes in. Saturn is the stern parent in the relationship, the one standing there saying, eat your vegetables first, and then maybe you can have dessert. And he was disciplined. Wladimir was disciplined, controlled, and incredibly focused on his career while she wanted more of his attention. She wanted them to stop living between 2 continents and actually build a life together. And that's where this square starts to hurt, because her moon is hungry for something that Saturn keeps restricting. She wants more closeness, while Saturn keeps answering with work, responsibility, distance, and not right now. And that can turn love into resentment because she felt deprived while he didn't understand why. Because from his position, he believes he was being responsible. And to add insult to injury, Vladimir's Uranus opposes her moon. So her moon isn't only dealing with the restrictions of his Saturn, now his Uranus is shaking the ground underneath it. Uranus is freedom-loving, unpredictable, and difficult to pin down. It can create this push and pull between emotional closeness and emotional distance, where one minute everything feels connected, and then the next, something changes without warning. So they fall in love, they separate, they find their way back to each other, they become engaged, and still they can never quite create a stable life under the same roof. And for her moon, there's no emotional rhythm she can settle into. Uranus keeps changing the weather. Closeness turns into distance. Warmth can suddenly go cold. Saturn makes her wait for the warmth, and Uranus makes sure she can never count on how long it's going to stay. And Uranus is not finished with these two yet, because her Uranus squares his sun. So now, Uranus is aspecting both their luminaries, and that instability is running through the entire relationship. This is classic on again, off again energy. Explosions, separations, unexpected reconciliations, and then the cycle starts all over again. Every time this relationship seemed to find solid ground, Uranus threw another lightning bolt into it. And because this is her Uranus squaring his sun, the more he tries to take the reins or stabilize things, the more her Uranus rebels against being controlled. So this relationship never seemed to find a steady current. Now, his Neptune conjuncts her ascendant. Neptune will make her feel like he is the person she's always dreamed of. He comes wrapped in rose-colored fog, and she doesn't really see him clearly. He becomes larger than life through her eyes. Neptune is like looking at someone through candlelight. The sharp edges disappear. The flaws retreat into shadow. And for a while, you can mistake the glow for the truth. And that's the danger here. She could begin falling in love with the future she saw reflected in him, the marriage, the home, and the family, until the dream and Wladimir become difficult to separate. And she kept trying to make that picture real. Neptune can give you a beautiful dream without ever giving you solid ground to build it on. And she is even more susceptible to that Neptune fog, because in her natal chart, Neptune squares her Venus. So idealizing someone in love is already written into her relationship pattern. And Neptune isn't alone there. Her Venus is also squared by Saturn and Uranus. So look at the contradiction. Neptune wants the fairy tale. Saturn says, not so fast. And Uranus can rip the whole thing apart without warning. Her Venus is caught between the dream, the wall, and the lightning bolt. She kept reaching for the fairy tale, but every time it seemed close enough to happen, Saturn shut the door and Uranus tore it off its hinges. So that's all I have today with these two, and rest in peace to her, and I will be back soon.